Okay, so as we dive in, let's do a quick recap of what we talked about last week. As we wrapped up pride, right? So we talked about the enemy's weakness in pride and how pride is something that's an attribute of Satan. He is the inventor of pride, he is the progenitor of pride, and he is somebody who uses pride. And pride is something that he uses, but it's also what may appear to be one of his greatest strengths, but is also his greatest downfall. We talked about the fact that the enemy was in a elevated place when God created him. You know, Satan, we have the kind of in our mind this picture of a man with the horns and a pitchfork and the red little dragon and all of that. All of that's nonsense. So when we saw Satan in his creation and we went through and read Ezekiel chapter 28, and it really highlighted how beautiful Satan was in his creation. But it was that beauty that caused him to swell up with pride, and his pride became his downfall. So with that, the world continues with this same thing because the world teaches us that pride is strength and that meekness is weakness. So we took a look at that fallacy because as we see in society, right, those who have pride, those who are puffed up, those who are displaying strength, they give us a totally different viewpoint of what Christ teaches when he tells us about being weak. He talks about us being humble. He talks about strength through humility as we went through. But then we talked about, towards the very end, how do we balance this out? And when it comes to spiritual warfare, we don't want to exalt ourselves more highly than we ought. And we also, at the same time, don't want to cower in fear. There's a middle ground where God wants us to be spiritually, to where we're not going around cowering from Satan and saying, oh, I don't have a chance, or, oh, I need to go hide in a corner and I can't participate in warfare and I don't have a reason to win. That is not what Christ has given us. He has given us a spirit of victory, power, right? Love, self-control, and not the spirit of fear. So we're going to respect Satan. We know that he's more powerful than us by ourselves. But we know that when we walk with Christ, that we ultimately have the victory over him because Christ already has the victory. So we don't walk around looking defeated in this life. We walk around with joy. We walk around with peace. We walk around with the power that we get from Christ. And that's where we're supposed to live. So with that, there's a balance, okay? And as we talked about our enemy, right? So over the past few weeks, we've been studying the adversary, his strengths, his weaknesses, and tonight we're going to really get into ourselves, our strengths and our weaknesses. Because not only do we want to understand the adversary, but we need to understand ourselves. If you don't know yourself and you don't know how humans function and we don't understand our own strengths and weaknesses, we're going to have a hard time winning in this battle. So I'm going to go to 2 Corinthians 12:10 and take this quote from Paul. He says, "For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities." This is a nice list of things that nobody wants to experience. He says, "For the sake of Christ, I am content with those things, for when I am weak, I am strong." So our humility can give us strength as long as with our humility we are carrying Christ. We're not relying on our own power, we're not relying on our own strength and our own skill, but we are matching it up to Christ. We're hiding behind the cross, and we're getting all of our strength from him. So let's take first a look at our weaknesses. All right, so once again, we want to understand how humans are. You know, you've been alive in this body for however many years now, and you have an idea of the things that make you tick individually. So humans have weaknesses collectively, right? There's a collective weakness that all people have. There's a collective thing that Satan can kind of bring to try to get us all off guard. But not only do we have a collective weakness, but we also have individual weaknesses. Now, I can't speak to your individual weakness. That's something that you have to do in your own meditative, reflective time. We'll talk about some of the collective things, and I'm going to challenge you at the end to bring it down to an individual level so that you can see the things that particularly Satan will try to buffet you with. All right? We need to know these things. So let's talk about a weakness. The major weakness that I want to highlight is fleshly desires. When we talk about fleshly desires, this body of weakness, as Paul talks about in Romans chapter 7, is one of the things that really fights against everything that we're trying to do spiritually. And it's one of the tools, our fleshly desires, one of the tools that Satan will use to try to attack you in spiritual warfare. So we need to understand how to respond to the flesh. And we're going to read this in Romans 7, starting at verse number 21, because this is a beautiful example. I can really appreciate the fact that Paul was very transparent here. He says, "So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God." Of course he does. As a follower of Christ, as a disciple of Christ, as an apostle, he delights in the law of God. And we can probably make a parallel there because we delight in the law of God. You would not be sitting here tonight if you did not have some kind of delight in the law of God. There are 100 other things that you could be doing, but you are here because you delight in the law of God. But he says, "I see another member waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells within my members." That's a key point that we need to understand when we read this passage. The law of sin dwells within my members. He says, "Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through our Lord Jesus the Christ. So then I myself serve the law of God through my mind, but with my flesh I serve the law of sin." So there we have it. A picture of spiritual warfare right here at the very beginning. We are mind, we are flesh, we are spirit, we are flesh, and there's one part of us that's trying to serve God, and there's another part that's trying to serve sin. And they happen to be in the same dwelling place. So we have this conflict. And the Apostle Paul talks about this conflict, and I can appreciate it because you're talking about a man who had revelations from God, a man who was responsible for writing the scriptures, a man who saw Jesus Christ, the resurrected Christ, in his glory, a man who was given special measure of spiritual gifts. The Apostle Paul had all of these things, yet he still struggled with the flesh. And I can appreciate that he put that in there because what does that let us know? Those who don't have these divine revelations, we don't have this apostolic authority. If he struggled in the flesh, of course we are going to struggle in the flesh as well. But we are not without hope. And that's why we come together to study these things so we can understand what the solution is. So as we go into this, when it comes down to the flesh, we know that the body naturally wants what it wants and not what God wants. In your mind, your spirit, you might have a connection with God. You might want God on a spiritual level, but your flesh still wants the things of the flesh. And when we face this conflict, sometimes we get into the habit of trying to say, all right, let's participate and let's be more spiritual. So we'll go to 1 Thessalonians 5:17, for example, which says, "Pray without ceasing." Beautiful passage. This is what I would say is a commandment and not a suggestion. So when Paul is saying to pray without ceasing, he is letting us know this is something that we need to incorporate into our lives. But what we know about praying without ceasing is that we can pray without ceasing, but we cannot pray our flesh away. No matter how hard you pray, no matter how long you get on your knees in your prayer closet, when you get up, your flesh is still going to be there. What else do we do? Another piece of insight that we get from the scripture is Acts 17:11, which says the Berean Jews, right? We know that they were more noble than the ones in Thessalonica because they examined the scriptures every day. They studied. This is something that we're supposed to do. It's a part of our spiritual toolkit, but no matter how hard you study, you cannot study your flesh away. When you come out of that text, and you finish your reading, and you finish your meditation, and you're contemplating over the text, your flesh is still going to be there. Psalm 1:2 says, "And on his law he meditates day and night." This is something else that we're supposed to do. Meditate on the word of God. Not just reading, but actually thinking about it. Absorbing the contents, trying to make the application in our lives. But no matter how much meditating you do, you cannot meditate your flesh away. We have all of these spiritual activities. beautiful things that we're supposed to do. And I don't want you to come away from this saying that, thinking that I'm trying to discourage you from doing spiritual things, because yes, pray, yes, study, yes, meditate, but understand that after all of that, you still have to deal with this flesh. So what do we do? As we continue to talk about this, I want to go back to the very beginning. Because when you study the flesh and how the flesh operates, we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 3 and see how Satan used the flesh to take Eve off guard. So this is a passage that, most of you are probably very familiar with. Genesis 3:6 says, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband who was with her, and he ate." So when you see this, and you think about the things that we're supposed to do and all of the praying, right, and the studying, the flesh was still there. Eve still had to deal with that. Now, when you go here, I highlighted 3 things, and it may be kind of hard to see on the screen, but the 3 things that I highlighted was good for food, okay? So put that in your notes. Delight to the eyes, okay? That's the second thing I highlighted. And then the third thing is make one wise. So as we have these 3 things in our notes, I want you to see back in Genesis that Satan used these 3 things to get Eve, and it's the same things he used to get us today. Because we have a parallel passage to this. John comes around thousands of years later, and he describes what happened in Genesis 3:6. In 1 John 2:16, he says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world." And when you go and you parallel this, what do you have? Good for food. Good for food is lust of the flesh. Her flesh saw some food. It was something that she wanted. It was something that she desired. And then when it came down to the delight to the eyes, this is lust of the eyes. And then when it comes down to making one wise, it was the pride of life. Satan uses these 3 things to trap us. He got Eve with it. He gets you and I with it. We're not ignorant of his devices. He's not using new tactics. There's no new techniques. He's using the same old stuff. Whatever he used to tempt Eve and Adam in the very beginning, and as soon as they had children, and we saw Cain, and you see just on down the line, you go through and read from Old Testament, Genesis to Revelation, all the way to where we are in 2022, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. Now, when it comes down to these 3 things, I want to break it down even further, because when you see good for food, I want you to see what that looks like for us today. What does that break down to? What is good for food? Why is that something that would even throw Eve off in the first place? But when you break down good for food and why that would even be a temptation, it's interesting. And I don't know this for certain. You know how we kind of in this class, we take a look at some things and sort of maybe speculate a little bit. We never speculate going outside of what is written, but we try to just meditate on the text, right? So we want to think about things. Now, as we studied throughout this, and we've talked about the tree of life, and a few weeks ago we kind of went through and talked about that a little bit more, but as you think about the nature and the character of God, I want you to consider him creating that tree in the midst of the garden. And he told them, at least he told Adam, do not eat of this tree. With what you know about the nature and the character of God, what do you think that fruit looked like? You know, this is not a question you can answer, but I just want you to think about this, okay? Because obviously, you know, in folklore, it's often an apple. And people talk about the apple that Eve ate. It doesn't mention that it was an apple, and I highly doubt it was an apple because the apple would be appealing. With the nature of the way God created things, do you remember when we talked, for those who were here a few weeks ago, about how God created abundance in the garden? And then he created lack And the only source of lack was evil. The abundance wasn't good. He said, you may eat freely of every tree in the garden. And every is an abundance word because God created abundance. These trees had good food. They had good fruit. There may have been 10, 20, 100, I don't know. However many trees that were in there, there was an abundance of trees that you could eat from. The only place where God created lack was the evil choice. And Satan's whole job was to get Eve to try to think that the abundance was where the lack was. That was the deception. This one thing that God is holding from you is the thing that you need to complete your life. She bought the okie doke, thinking that the abundance was in the lack. But we can see in the nature and the character of God that he did not create it that way. So if I think about the nature and the character of God, I don't think, again, I don't know, but I don't think that tree was, I don't think it was something that probably looked that attractive. When Satan started talking to Eve, what does it say? She saw that it was good for food. So what did she see before? It wasn't, right? She saw that it was good to food after the conversation with Satan. What did she see before? Which further supports, again, a possible thought that may have been a really ugly, messed up looking piece of fruit. And again, I'm speculating here, but just going based on the nature. So,
and they didn't really, they didn't realize.
I think he's going to adjust the levels. All right, go ahead. What was that?
How were they able to recognize the fruit that was appealing? And then after they do this, God asked them, how do you know you're naked? So why did they know they were naked?
They didn't know that they were naked because the tree, that fruit, unlocked a level of what was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It unlocked something in their awareness. Correct, yeah. So once they ate of that fruit, it unlocked a level of awareness and it was something that God never designed for us to have. And if you think about how this works, this is still built into humanity today. I got a 2-year-old in my house who will pull off his diaper and, right? Streaking party. Why? He's naked and not ashamed. At 2 years old, that level of awareness has not yet unlocked. And the parallel is this is the way we were in the Garden of Eden. This is the way Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden before they ate of that fruit. They were naked and not ashamed. And God has given us that back in a childlike state so that we can see the innocence that we lost. Okay, so that's where that came from. But as Eve saw that it was good for food, ultimately what she saw, next to your notes for good for food, I want you to write the word compatibility. Compatibility. Good for food is compatibility. Whatever that tree looked like before, whatever that fruit looked like before she had the discussion with the serpent, she did not see the compatibility. But afterwards, she says, oh yeah, this can be eaten. This is good for food. I can take a bite of this and my body won't reject it. There's compatibility there. And that's a key point in how Satan's going to tempt us. So remember that. The next thing she saw was a delight to the eyes. And the word I want you to write next to that is magnetism. Magnetism. The delight for the eyes equals magnetism. And that's another thing that Satan's going to use to try to get us off guard. All right? So when it became a delight to the eyes, again, what if it was an ugly piece of fruit before, but then after having that discussion, all of a sudden it started to kind of look a little different. This reminds me of a personal story because I can remember when I met my wife. She's going to kill me for telling this, but here we are. I saw her at SMU doing a summer camp. It wasn't even here at Greenville Avenue, right? I met her at a summer camp in SMU, and I said, look at this pretty little thing working behind the desk. I'm going to try to talk to her, right? So I went up, and we had a nice little conversation. And I even, after she got off work, we were kind of walking and talking. She walked to her room, and she said, all right, good night. And she closed the door. I said, she won't stay out here and talk to me. She don't want to kick it, so I just assumed she wasn't interested. Then all of a sudden, a few years later, I became a delight to the eyes. I don't know what happened. At that time, I was not a delight to the eyes. She was ignoring her brother. Now, in her defense, I found out later on she was actually dating someone at the time. But once that ended, I became a delight. I became a delight to the eyes. So, here's Eve's scenario. The tree did not look good at first. The fruit did not look good, apparently, at first. But once it became a delight to the eyes, there was a sense of magnetism. Just like when you see somebody and you're attracted to them, there's a sense of magnetism. There's something that draws you in. That's a tool that Satan is going to use in spiritual warfare against you, magnetism. And then the third thing says, make one wise. All right? And the word I want you to write next to that is enhancement. Enhancement. When you go into making one wise, what is this going to do for me as I get ready to engage in this fruit? Why do I want to eat of it in the first place? It was possibly an ugly fruit sitting in the middle of the garden that had no appeal and no attraction, but then all of a sudden when I get into a conversation with this serpent, I start to see things that I did not see before. And it has brought in magnetism and compatibility. And then he goes and tells me that it's going to enhance my life. Enhancements. All right? So these are the three elements that Eve has to deal with. And we're going to bring this in because we're going to see how we have to deal with these same three elements. So what I want us to do with this is kind of bring it home. Break down Eve's temptation. How would this look in our lives today? Because those three elements that I gave you, good for food, delight to the eyes, and making one wise. When it comes down to compatibility, magnetism, and enhancements, we're not in the Garden of Eden. We're not going to go through that same temptation, but we are going to go through things that look similar. So let's just talk, all right? One of the things that I like to do in this class is we got to face Satan in this warfare, and we're going to call it like it is. We're going to call him out. We're going to talk about the things that he uses against us because he's using the same thing against all of us. There is nothing new here. So let's talk about it. What do you guys think? What does Eve's temptation look like in our life? What's an example of something that we have where Satan tries to get us with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, or pride of life? Technology. All right. Which one would you tie that to? I think you're right. There's so many ways you can go with technology. When you start talking about social media, oh my goodness. Lust of the flesh. I go and look at somebody else's things, and lust of the eyes, and I can see all of the beauty in everybody else's life and wish I was here, holding up a banner for travel and vacation and all that kind of stuff. Pride of life. I see what other people are driving. I see the house that other people are living in. I see how beautiful everything looks for other people. You're right. Social media, technology can be used for all three. What else? Deception. All right. Explain, elaborate.
It's something to the extent of making you see something you don't want to see.
Making you see something that you don't want to see, or making something look or appear different than it actually is. I remember when I was growing up, they used to have these little disclaimers on the mirror, and it said things in the mirror, objects are closer than they appear. I don't know if mirror technology has advanced or whatever the case may be, but I don't see those disclaimers anymore. But yeah, that's what that was all about. It's trying to give you a warning that what you're seeing may not be an accurate reflection. So be careful. It's a good one. What else do we have? Ethics. Elaborate. Mhm.
If we're not careful, I think we can rationalize that. I think we get caught up in, it looks attractive, a promotion or more money or whatever. And so I think, like for Eve, it's different, but I think we rationalize it, or we may even say, this is, I've been working real hard for that. I deserve this. So I think we have to be careful with that.
Which one? But you kind of said it at the end, right? It looks appealing. Lust of the eyes, right? That gets into us. That's magnetism. Things that draw us in. If you can just compromise a little bit, I mean, you can get 25% raise if I can just get you to work on Sundays. Magnetism. Things that are looking to draw you in. Satan's always using things like that. This is good. Let me get one more. One more example, because these are great ones. Make one wise? Mm-hmm.
I'm wiser than anybody. I think I can over talk them. I can also coerce them better. There's just a lot of things I can do better if I'm wise, especially if I'm wiser than you.
Look at that.
I didn't mean you personally.
That's a good one. If I can just showcase my wisdom, if people can see how great I am, how knowledgeable I am, how wise I am, enhancement. That's what that boils down to. If I can just enhance myself over other people in some sort of way so that I can get an advantage. These are traps, brothers and sisters. Making things look more appealing than what they really are, absolutely. These are all traps. These are pitfalls. These are things that we must avoid. But before we can know to avoid them, we must know that they are being used against us. Right? We're talking about all of this to increase our awareness, because if we don't have the awareness, then we will fall victim. So let's go back and take a look. Eve. And our brother James gives us some great insight. And I love it. I love how the scriptures work together. From Old Testament to New Testament, cover to cover, you see the same principles being used where we can make an application. And we can go and read something in Genesis and find an answer in James. It's beautiful. Here's what James says in James 1:14. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by what? His own lust. So if we are going to become successful in avoiding these things, the compatibility issue, the magnetism issue, and the enhancement issue, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life that Satan is using against us, we have to ultimately learn how to kill the thrill. You got to kill the thrill. The only way, the only reason you would ever engage in any sort of sin or any sort of activity that is not pleasing to God is if there's some sort of thrill involved with it. That's it. Why would Eve want to go to that tree? It's 100 other trees. A dozen. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? God created abundance. You got all these other trees. You got all your nourishment. You got absolute perfection. They lacked nothing until Satan made it seem like they did. There's a thrill. There's something I got to get. There's something that I'm missing. And if we're going to become successful in spiritual warfare, we have to learn how to kill the thrill in these things. Sin only has appeal when it seems fun. Know how Satan operates. He's not going to come at you with something that does not seem like it's going to be a good time. You're not thinking about repercussions. You're not thinking about destruction, death, or anything that comes around it. If Eve had been wearing spiritual goggles, she would have looked beyond the physical fruits. And this is how Satan gets us. It's all smoke and mirrors. If I can just get you to look beyond the physical, or rather beyond the spiritual, get your eyes off of the spiritual, put it back into the physical, now I got you right where I want you. Because he can manipulate things in the physical world that don't equate to the spiritual reality. Look at this, Genesis 3:3. But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it. What? Lest you die. When we consider the lest you die, that's what's missing. How do you kill the thrill? Throw in a lest you die. See things the way they really are. All right, let me use an example. This one may be a little crude, but stay with me because I need you to get this point. Think about magnetism, things that draw us in. Sometimes things are so magnetic to us that we feel like once we get there, we can't escape. There's a point of no return. So here we have a brother and a sister who went out on a date and they really like each other, and now instead of them going separate ways, they actually went upstairs together. Mistake. And now things are hot and heavy and they're breathing hard and all of this kind of stuff, right? Oh, I'm at the point of no return now. I can't turn this off. This is what most people would say. The magnetism's too strong. I can't get out of this. Now picture the same scenario. You feel like you're at the point of no return until that person whispers into your ear, I have AIDS, by the way. Lest you die. I don't care how hot and heavy. I don't care how much I like you. I don't care how much I thought I was at the point of no return. You getting up, you putting your clothes on, and you finding your way out. Why? Lest you die, right? You thought you were at the point of no return. And you thought you couldn't pull away with them from this thing because it was way too magnetic. And then those words come into your ear and it changes the whole game. This is how we have to approach spiritual warfare. We always got to have that lest you die moments. And you have to have it by keeping your eyes on spiritual things, not on the physical things. As soon as Satan gets me off guard and gets me to start looking at the things of this world and to keep focused on the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eye and the pride of the life, as long as he has me down here, he's got me. But when I elevate, go where Christ is, not where Satan is. God has blessed us with the ability to mentally elevate and go where he is. And then I don't have to worry about Satan getting me off guard. But I can only do it if I go. If you stay here, it's going to be bad for you. Romans 8:5 says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh, and those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on things of the Spirit. What gives you life? It's the question. The word live is used twice in this verse. Does your life come from things of the flesh, or does your life come from things of the Spirit? If my life totally revolves around earthly things, the magnetism, the compatibilities, and the enhancements, and all the shiny trinkets that Satan will parade around in front of me, if my life revolves around these things, I am living for the things of the flesh. But if God becomes the ace, if the things of the Spirit become the most important things, and I have set my mind on the things of the Spirit and kept my mind on the things of the Spirit, it's going to be difficult for Satan to get me there. What gives me life? That's a tough question. All right? It's an easy question to answer. Because if I were just to poll everybody and say, what gives you life? The things of the flesh or the things of the Spirit? And I say, raise your hand if it's things of the flesh. No hands go up. Raise your hand if it's things of the Spirit, and all the hands go up. It's easy to do that in this room. But when you get home, and when you have to answer this honestly and ask yourself, what gives me life on Sunday? Watching the Cowboys struggle? What gives me life on Sunday? Sunday afternoon naps? Gotta love those naps. What's giving me life? Worshiping God? Or is it something on my checklist? Take self-inventory. That's all I'm asking us to do tonight. Just be honest. All right? Please don't lie to yourself. You can't lie to God, so you might as well just take inventory and be honest about it. You don't have to tell me. All right? This is personal. Take this home and deal with it. And I'm saying this because I dealt with this, and I'm still dealing with this. These lessons kick my tail all the way up and down before I get up here to present them to you guys. It's been beating up on me all week. It's your turn, all right? Y'all take this stuff. Take this and go home with it and challenge yourself with these questions. What gives you life? And be honest. And I found that as I took inventory of myself, there were a lot of things that give me life that are out of place. Way more than I wanted it to be, if I'm being quite honest. And now I got to dissect this stuff. Why is this enhancing me so much, or why am I chasing these enhancements? For a lot of people, Bible study is boring. It's a chore. It's a labor. It's like when I tell my kids to wash the dishes. They know they have to do it, but they hate it. They want to get done with it as fast as possible so they can go get back to the stuff that brings them life, like video games and annoying each other and tearing my house up and all that kind of stuff. That gives them life. Now we got to ask ourselves the same question. Brother Humphrey.
Yeah, I think this is kind of undoing some of my thoughts about Eve. I just want you to let me know what I'm asking in the question form. So all my life I've been thinking that Eve was not, she was not vulnerable to the Romans 8 law, to where she did not have the temptation of sin from the get-go. But based upon this scripture and kind of what you talked about last week, you can't go around thinking, I'm not going to sin, I'm not going to sin, I'm not going to sin. You're going to sin. But my question is, did she have this from the get-go?
So as we go back, I believe what Brother James said, each one who is tempted is carried away by their own lust. So yeah, it was in there.
Okay, so my follow-up to that is, we're all Adam and Eve, correct? That would have been either one of us.
Yeah. Don't be too tough on your mind on our great grandmother and grandfather, because if you were standing in that garden, you would have did it too. Each and every one of us, it's inside of us. And that's what Paul talks about in Romans 8 or Romans 7, right? This struggle against flesh and blood. It's a battle. My mind wants to serve God. My heart wants to serve God. But I got this flesh thing. And it's pulling me this way. And it's a constant warring. So when we talk about spiritual warfare, this is what we're talking about tonight. So yes, Eve had the lust inside of her, the desire. Now, here's a good question. Where did the desire come from? Did she have it before or after she talked to that serpent? All right? You don't have to answer it, just think about it. Think about it. Who planted that lust within Eve? I mean, it was there, obviously. But these are just good things to kind of meditate on. But what we know about the tempter is that the suggestions that he brings forward are meant to draw us off. That's warfare. When Satan is trying to snatch your soul, it's all about just getting you to lose focus. Don't think about Satan. Just think about how that knucklehead is not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Don't think about the spiritual side. I want you to just look at your spouse and look at how she is not doing the things that you think she should be doing. Focus on the person. He's always trying to draw us down to this level. But we want to talk about elevating ourselves so that we can go up. Any question before we move on to strengths, on weaknesses, comments, thoughts? Y'all have been great so far. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Brother, I'm sorry. Just
Nah.
a little stuff on it.
Go for it.
If the devil, you asked the question, did the desire, was it in her before? He had to have something to appeal to, correct? Or
Yeah.
no?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that kind of answer the question, or are we leading toward it?
I think so.
Okay.
I was just messing with your noodle a little bit.
I'll leave it there.
So he's saying, Satan threw it out there, right? Satan pushed his cards on the table and said, you want to play or not? So yeah, Eve had to have that there. I asked you that, but yeah, Eve had to have the desire. Just like we discussed, if it doesn't appeal to you, it won't work. It was already appealing to her, yes. I think so. Again, going back to what James said and looking at the nature of man. James said it's already there and it's getting drawn out. You are drawn to whatever it is that you're drawn to. When Satan is attacking me, he doesn't come to me with an 8-ball of cocaine. Zero appeal. Drugs has never had an appeal on me, but you know what? He will go to some people with that. He'll go to some people with that. He comes to me with the stuff that he knows, right? He knows. As they watch spiritual warfare, there are things that make you tick. Now, he might scatter shoot things from time to time, so maybe he will tempt me with drugs. But I have no appeal to that, so it's not going to draw me off sides. So he'll keep scatter shooting until there's the weakness. Yeah, he said he knows what you like and he tempts you with it. That's it. So as we study our strengths and our weaknesses, this is why it's so important for us to know ourselves. And you know yourself. You know yourself. The question is not, do you know yourself? The question is, can you be honest with yourself? For long enough to admit that you have some weaknesses. All right? If we can be honest with ourselves, it's going to help us a whole lot. Now, when it comes down to our strengths, Jesus. Easy answer, right? Simple answer. But sometimes the simplest answers are the most effective answers. You don't have to jump through hoops. You don't have to look for elegant, extravagant things. I'm not up here trying to tell you some new thing. Our strength is in the Lord. And if we're going to win in spiritual warfare, this is the only way to get it done. Could you practice meditation? Yeah. Could you do yoga? I mean, sure, fine, whatever, right? Could you go and read your purpose-driven life book? What are those little calendar things they used to have? Daily soup for the soul. All of that stuff's good. All that, yeah, it's fine. These things are fine. But at the end of the day, your victory can only be secured through Christ. Let's back it up with some scriptures. Ephesians 6:10 says, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. 1 Chronicles 16:11 says, seek the Lord in his strength, seek his presence continually. And Isaiah 40:29 says, he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Our entire battle, everything that we're going to do must start, be in the middle, and end with Christ if you expect to experience any sort of success. So when we get our strength from Christ, I want you to take a look at this passage in Isaiah 40:31. Very familiar passage, but we're going to kind of take a different angle on it. It says, "Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." Now, when I read this recently, something new kind of popped out at me. Notice, it says they will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run, and then they will walk. And I asked myself, why does it say they will mount up with wings like eagles, but it doesn't say anything about flying? You ever think about that? Why would you mount up with wings like eagles if you're not gonna fly? It says you will run and not get tired. That's an action. It says you will walk and not become weary. Walking is also an action. But it just says you're gonna mount up with wings, but you're not flying. What do y'all think? Why?
Eagles will mount up like, for the nature of an eagle. An eagle will go to the highest point when there's a storm and go to the highest point and mount up their wings, and they wait for the air to lift them. I think that when it says we'll mount up like wings like eagles, I think, now that you said that, I think that we would have the common sense or the knowledge or the encouragement from the Lord to, like you said, you're waiting on him. You're mounting up. You're ready for him to lift you with that, to lift you up with his strength. That's what I think.
So she says, when you mount up with wings like eagles, you're going to mount up and wait on the Lord to lift you. Not through my own effort, just like eagles do in a storm. Eagles are a very unique bird when you study nature. I love when the Bible, the scriptures talk about animals, right? Lions. We talked about lions a few weeks ago, okay? Ants. Solomon observed the ants and got wisdom out of that. Then we can look at eagles and we get this wisdom. And one of the attributes of an eagle is that the eagle is the only bird that flies into a storm. Most other birds fly away. The eagle flies into the storm because the eagle will use the storm to elevate and get it higher to the point to where it can go above the storm. It's a unique characteristic of an eagle. All right, Shirley?
The wings have become very strong from flying into the storm. So that's probably why he says to you, use, wings like an eagle. You have to develop this strength to endure.
These are good observations. All right. Any other thoughts on this text? Mount up with wings like an eagle, but you're not actually doing any flying. It's a peculiar passage when you think of it that way. So here's what I thought. And it kind of coincides with what both of these sisters said. Wait on the Lord and gain new strength. Mount up with wings like eagles. When you're dealing with people, people don't have wings. It's not a natural thing. But we do have legs, so as he talks about running, this is something that we're supposed to do. This is naturally. This is our part. When he says, walk, right? You will run and not get tired, and you will walk and not become weary. Walking is something that we can do. This is our part. Now, when we start talking about at first, before you get into running and before you get into walking, you need to mount up with wings like eagles first, which means that I need a supernatural strength before I get started on any of this other stuff. The Lord gives us strength to endure things and to deal with things from a totally different perspective than this world. When we talked about this before, as Peter tells us that we're supposed to be a peculiar people, our life is supposed to be peculiar in every kind of way. Do you know why? We have access to supernatural resources. Mounting up with a wing as an eagle, my neighbor will also run. My coworkers also walk. When I got eagle's wings, though, and I am walking through this life, I'm running and I'm walking through life, and I see them, they're running and they're walking through life, and Satan starts coming at you. All right? This is warfare. Guys, we keep talking about this. War is not easy. We have victory, but it does not mean that there won't be a fight. You're going to come out this thing battered, bloodied, and bruised. There's going to be some divorces. There's going to be some heartaches. And this may not happen to everybody. I'm just calling out things, right? There's going to be loss of job. There's going to be loss of loved ones. There's going to be all sorts of things. So many things in this life can beat us up. But when I'm walking and my neighbor's walking and we're both using our natural strength, as his legs start to collapse and my legs start to collapse, I got eagle's wings. So now, not by my strength will I walk through this scenario. That's the supernatural element. We got the natural elements, but then we got this supernatural component that only children of God have, and that these wings can now carry me when my legs fail. I don't need to fly. I'm wearing wings not to do supernatural things, but to do normal things in a supernatural way. That's what the passage is trying to teach us. This is the advantage. All of the strength that we have, but only if we can access it by staying focused on the spiritual. So when we're both going through problems, and my legs collapse like his legs are going to collapse, but my wings kick in, that's when Jesus says, I will give you peace that passes all understanding. In other words, you're supposed to be losing your mind right now. The thing that you're going through is supposed to be driving you crazy. You're supposed to be losing your mind and having a fit and cussing people out just like everybody else in the world, right? Why are you not doing it? Where does that peace come from? It don't even make sense. My legs gave out, but my eagle's wings kicked in, so I'm good. All right? God gives us the ability to do normal things in a supernatural way. So we don't have to be out here trying to do supernatural stuff. You just live in a normal life. But your life looks a lot different. Child of God. This is a beautiful thing. All right. Our strength is in the Lord. Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. We have to get out of the habit of trying to fight a spiritual battle with carnal weapons. These carnal weapons do not work. If you're going to acquire victory, you cannot expect to rely on your own wisdom, knowledge, goals, weapons, vision, feelings, understanding. It's not good enough. Your own rationale, what makes sense to you in your mind. You cannot rely on your own strength, as we just talked about. You have to go completely on the Lord. 2 Corinthians 10:3-4 says, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty. Mighty through the strongholds, the pulling down of strongholds, rather. So as we get ready to leave, just know, with our strengths and with our weaknesses, Satan is going to do everything he can to you this week to try to distract you, make you use carnal weapons instead of mighty weapons. Why does he not want you using the mighty weapons? Because the mighty weapons have the real power. The mighty weapons are the ones that you win with. But when you bring in the carnal weapons, when I think I can do it with my own intellect and my own wisdom and my own strength and my own knowledge and my experiences, when I think that all of that trumps what God has to offer me, I have just discarded completely the mighty weapons. I've exchanged a bazooka for a pea shooter. It's not a good idea in warfare to come in with carnal weapons. As you study this week, write down a list of carnal weapons that you've been using and find a spiritual replacement. Yes, it's going to be challenging. But we got to put in the work. If you work through this class, it will work on you. Your life will elevate. Write down your carnal weapons. Go ahead and take a picture of it. I don't want y'all to forget. Yeah, I got your cell phones out. Take a picture of it. Write down a list of carnal weapons and be honest with yourself, brutally honest with yourself, and then find the spiritual replacements. The mighty weapons that are going to actually give you victory. Let us bow. Holy Father, we come to you at this time just giving thanks once again for allowing us to come together and engage in this study. Father, we thank you for your word. There's so much wisdom in there. There's so much insight. We know that the victory comes through the things that you have revealed to us. We know that the victory comes through your Son who came and sacrificed himself for us so that we can have abundant life in him. Father, and we just pray, Father, that we will never discard that abundant life or throw it to the side. May we not try to do it with our own might. May we not try to do it with our own wisdom or our own power. Let us rely 100% on you so that we can live the beautiful life and let Christ shine through us. Help us, Father, to mount up with wings as eagles, and whenever we fall down, you will carry us the rest of the way. In the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ, amen.